The winter of 1889 had come early to Silver Creek, Montana territory, bringing with it a fury of snow that painted the world in shades of white and gray. The wind howled through the narrow streets like a wounded animal, rattling windows and sending tumbleweeds skittering across the frozen dirt roads. It was the kind of night that kept honest folk indoors, huddled around their fires with hot coffee and warm blankets. But the Gilded Rose dance hall was anything but quiet. Clara Edison stood before the cracked mirror in the cramped dressing room, pinning a wayward curl back into place. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold that seeped through the thin walls, but from the knowledge that tonight would be different. After 3 months in Silver Creek, she'd learned to read the room like a book, to sense the mood of the miners and ranchers who frequented the establishment. Tonight, there was electricity in the air, crackling beneath the surface of forced merriment. "Clara, honey, you're up next," Martha called from the doorway, her voice roughened by years of cigarette smoke and disappointment. "And for heaven's sake, smile like you mean it. These boys didn't come here to see a funeral." Clara forced her lips into the practiced curve she'd perfected since arriving from Ohio. Back home, she'd been Miss Clara Edison, daughter of a once prosperous merchant. Now she was just another dance hall girl, earning her keep one waltz at a time in a town that barely appeared on most maps. She adjusted the emerald green dress that had seen better days, its hem frayed from countless nights of being stepped on by clumsy cowboys' boots. The fabric still held a ghost of its former elegance, much like Clara herself, at 23. She was neither the youngest nor the prettiest of the girls at the Gilded Rose, but there was something in her bearing, a quiet dignity that set her apart from the others who'd long since surrendered to the harsh realities of frontier life. The main hall thrummed with life as she emerged from behind the worn velvet curtain. Miners fresh from the copper deposits in the nearby hills mingled with cattle drivers passing through on their way to the rail stations. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sharp scent of whiskey, while a tired pianist hammered out popular tunes on an instrument that hadn't been properly tuned since President Grant was in office. Clara's eyes swept the room, cataloging the familiar faces. There was Samuel Twain, the telegraph operator who always requested Beautiful Dreamer and tipped generously despite his modest salary. In the corner sat the Roosevelt brothers, Theodore and Elliot, cattle barons who owned half the valley and never let anyone forget it. They were already deep in their cups, their laughter too loud and their hands too free, but it was the figure by the door that caught her attention and held it. Sheriff James Monroe stood like a statue carved from the very mountains that surrounded Silver Creek. At 35, he wore his authority like a second skin, though the badge on his chest seemed almost unnecessary. Everyone knew who he was, the man who'd cleaned up Deadwood before coming to their humble town, the one who'd faced down the Dalton gang single-handed and lived to tell the tale. He was also the man who never danced. In the 2 years since his arrival, James Monroe had become as much a fixture of Silver Creek as the church steeple or the water tower. He maintained order with a combination of fair judgment and an iron will, earning respect from even the roughest elements. But he kept himself apart, an island of solitude in a sea of humanity. The story was well known. His wife Catherine had been killed 5 years ago when the Jackson gang had raided their homestead while James was away on a marshal's errand. He'd hunted them down, every last one, then hung up his federal badge and taken the sheriff position in Silver Creek, a self-imposed exile from a world that had taken everything from him. Clara had seen him before. Of course, it was impossible not to notice him during his regular rounds, checking on the various establishments that walked the line between legitimate business and the gray areas that frontier towns quietly tolerated. But he'd never stayed for the dancing, never even removed his hat. He'd simply survey the room with those storm-gray eyes, exchange a few words with the proprietor, and disappear back into the night. Tonight was different. Tonight, he lingered. "Well, I'll be," Martha whispered beside Clara. "The sheriff's actually staying. Must be the storm keeping him from his usual patrol." Clara doubted it was the weather. there was something in his posture, a weariness that went bone deep. She'd seen that look before in her father's eyes when the bank had foreclosed on their store, in her mother's face at the funeral. It was the look of someone who'd been carrying a burden too long and was finally feeling its full weight. The pianist struck up a new tune, and couples began forming on the small dance floor. Clara steeled herself for another night of forced smiles and wandering hands. But before she could approach her usual clients, a shadow fell across her path. "Miss Edison." James Monroe's voice was exactly what she'd imagined, deep and measured, like distant thunder. Up close, she could see the lines etched around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He smelled of leather and soap and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken. "Sheriff Monroe," she managed, proud that her voice didn't betray her surprise. "I don't believe I've seen you on the dance floor before." "I don't dance." The words were flat, matter of fact. But there was something else there, buried deep. "Haven't in 5 years." "Then why—" Today would have been her birthday. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. He cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Catherine, she would have been 32. Clara's heart twisted. She knew loss intimately, had watched it hollow out her parents until there was nothing left but echoes. "I'm sorry." "She loved to dance," he continued, as if the words had been bottled up too long and were finally spilling free. "Used to make me practice in our kitchen, stepping on my toes and laughing when I complained." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Said I moved like a bear trying to waltz." "And did you move like a bear?" "Probably still do." He paused, seeming to wage some internal battle. Then, with the air of a man stepping off a cliff, he extended his hand. "Would you? That is, might you be willing to help a bear remember how to waltz?" Clara stared at his outstretched hand, calloused from years of handling guns and reins, steady despite the vulnerability of the moment. She thought of all the hands that had reached for her since she'd arrived in Silver Creek, grasping and demanding. This was different. This was a request, not a demand, a plea from one lost soul to another. She placed her hand in his. "I'd be honored, Sheriff." His hand engulfed hers, warm and surprisingly gentle. As he led her onto the dance floor, Clara was acutely aware of the sudden hush that fell over the room. The Gilded Rose had seen many things, but Sheriff James Monroe dancing with a hall girl was not among them. "I should warn you," Clara said as they took their position, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not— that is, despite what you might think. I've never actually—" She felt heat rise in her cheeks, unable to complete the confession. How could she explain that despite months of working in a dance hall, she'd managed to avoid the actual dancing, that she'd survived on conversation and carefully maintained distance? Pouring drinks and listening to lonely men talk about their dreams and disappointments, that the thought of being held, even in the formal structure of a dance, terrified her almost as much as it drew her. "Miss Edison." She looked up into his eyes and found understanding there, as if he could read the truth written across her burning face. Taking a shaky breath, she leaned closer, her words barely audible above the music. "You're my first dance." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. His hand tightened slightly on hers, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of mountains and promises carved in stone. "Then I swear to be your last." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither fully understood. Around them, the world seemed to fade the curious stares, the whispered speculation, the grinding noise of a honky-tonk piano. There was only the music and the movement and the strange sense that something momentous was beginning. James moved stiffly at first, his body remembering patterns long forgotten. Clara followed his lead, her initial nervousness giving way to wonder. She'd expected him to be rough, demanding like the others. Instead, He held her as if she were made of spun glass, maintaining a respectful distance even as they moved in time to the music. "You're doing fine," she murmured when he stumbled slightly over a turn. "Catherine used to say I thought too much," he replied. Said dancing was about feeling, not thinking. "She sounds wise." She was. The past tense fell between them like a stone. "She would have liked you, I think." She had a way of seeing past what people showed to what they really were. Clara wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A fallen woman. A desperate girl clinging to survival in a harsh world. Or something else entirely. "Why tonight?" she asked. "After 2 years. Why now?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Because I'm tired of being a ghost haunting my own life. Because she would have hated what I've become, all duty and no heart. Because—" He paused, meeting her eyes. "Because when I saw you tonight, standing there like you were waiting for something you didn't believe would come, I recognized myself." The music changed, sliding into a slower melody that required them to step closer. Clara could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the pulse beating at his throat. This close, she noticed things: a thin scar along his jaw, the way his eyes weren't just gray but flecked with blue, like storm clouds breaking. "People will talk," she warned him. "A sheriff dancing with a girl like me." "Let them talk." His voice was firm. "I've spent 5 years caring what people think, doing what's proper and expected. Where's it gotten me alone in a house full of ghosts, going through the motions of living without actually being alive?" "And you think I can change that?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, vulnerable and hopeful in equal measure. "I think," he said slowly, "that maybe we can help each other remember what it feels like to be human again." The dance ended, but neither moved to separate. Around them, the hall had returned to its usual chaos, laughter and arguments, the clink of glasses and scrape of chairs. But Clara felt as if she stood in the eye of a storm, protected by the solid presence of the man before her. "Thank you," she said simply. "Will you—" He cleared his throat, suddenly looking younger, uncertain. "That is, would it be acceptable if I called on you properly? I mean, not here, but—" "I live at Mrs. Franklin's boarding house," Clara heard herself say. "She serves tea on Sunday afternoons." "Sunday. Then—" He stepped back, returning to the formal sheriff she'd known from a distance. But something had changed. There was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a sense of possibility that made her heart race. "Until Sunday, Miss Edison." Until Sunday, Sheriff Monroe. He touched the brim of his hat and turned to go, his departure tracked by dozens of curious eyes. Clara stood frozen on the dance floor, her hand still tingling where he'd held it, her mind struggling to process what had just occurred. "Well, well, well." Martha appeared at her elbow, grinning like a cat with cream. "Our little Clara, catching the eye of the most eligible bachelor in the territory, and him a sheriff. No less." "It was just a dance," Clara protested, but her burning cheeks betrayed her. "Honey, that was not just a dance. That was a man stepping out of a 5-year winter." Martha's expression grew serious. "You be careful, though. James Monroe's a good man, but he's carrying more ghosts than a graveyard. And this town, well, they don't take kindly to their heroes mixing with us common folk." Clara knew Martha was right. Already she could see the disapproving looks from the respectable women who occasionally ventured into the Gilded Rose with their husbands. Tomorrow, the gossip would spread like wildfire through Silver Creek. The sheriff and the dance hall girl. It was the stuff of scandal and speculation. But as she watched James disappear into the swirling snow outside, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Ohio: hope. It was fragile as frost on a window pane, liable to shatter at the slightest touch, but it was there, warming her from the inside out. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Clara went through the motions of her work, but her mind kept returning to those moments on the dance floor. The weight of his hand on her waist, the rumble of his voice, the promise in his words, "Then I swear to be your last." It was near dawn when she finally made her way back to the boarding house, her feet aching and her dress damp from the snow. The storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and new. As she climbed the stairs to her small room, Clara allowed herself a moment of pure, unbridled possibility. Perhaps Silver Creek would be different from Ohio. Perhaps here, in this rough frontier town where the rules of civilization bent and sometimes broke, there was room for second chances, for a disgraced merchant's daughter and a grieving lawman to find something neither had dared hope for. Through her window, she could see the sheriff's office in the distance, a lamp still burning in the window. Was he thinking of their dance, of the promise that hung between them like morning mist? Clara pressed her fingers to the cold glass, whispering words that were part prayer, part promise of her own. Until Sunday, the rising sun painted the Montana mountains gold and rose, and for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach 3 months ago, Clara Edison believed she might have found something worth staying for. Not just survival, but the chance at truly living again. In his office across town, James Monroe sat at his desk, staring at the wanted posters and thinking of emerald green dresses and the way a woman's hand had felt in his after 5 years of emptiness. Change was coming to Silver Creek, whether the town was ready or not, and it had begun with a dance. The news arrived with Sunday's dawn, carried on the lips of a breathless telegraph operator who'd run straight from the station to the sheriff's office. James Monroe was halfway through his morning coffee when Samuel Morse burst through the door, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. "Sheriff, the McGraw gang. They hit the Northern Pacific line last night, killed 2 guards and made off with the Army payroll." James set down his cup slowly, the anticipation of afternoon tea with Clara Edison suddenly feeling like a luxury he couldn't afford. "How far?" 40 miles north, near Copper Junction. "But Sheriff—" Samuel paused, wringing his hat between nervous hands. "They left a message, said they're coming for Silver Creek next." The McGraw gang. James knew them by reputation, 5 brothers who'd terrorized the territories for the better part of a decade. Unlike common outlaws who struck randomly, the McGraws were methodical, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. They'd been lying low for 2 years, and their reemergence meant trouble for every lawman within 100 miles. "Send word to the marshal's office in Helena," James ordered, already reaching for his gun belt. "And get me Edison Grant and the Roosevelt boys. If the McGraws are coming, we need every able-bodied man ready." As Samuel rushed out, James allowed himself one moment of regret for the Sunday afternoon that would never be. Then he pushed thoughts of green dresses and shy smiles aside, becoming once again the shield that stood between Silver Creek and chaos. By noon, the entire town buzzed with nervous energy. Women hurried through their shopping, casting anxious glances at every stranger. Men cleaned rifles that hadn't seen use since the Indian conflicts a decade prior. The atmosphere was electric with fear and anticipation, the same charged air that preceded summer storms. Clara heard the news from Martha as they prepared the hall for the quieter Sunday crowd. "The McGraw gang," Martha said, her usual bravado dampened by genuine concern. "Lord help us all. They say the eldest brother, William, once shot a man for spilling his whiskey." "Surely the sheriff," Clara began, but Martha cut her off with a bitter laugh. "1 man against 5 killers, Monroe's good, but he's not invincible." She paused, studying Clara with knowing eyes. "Heard he was supposed to call on you today." Clara busied herself with polishing glasses, unwilling to acknowledge the disappointment that sat like lead in her stomach. "The town's safety comes first. I understand that." "Do you?" Martha's voice softened. "Because if you're planning on caring for that man, you'd better understand what it means. Being with a lawman is nothing but worry and waiting, never knowing if this is the day they don't come home." Before Clara could respond, the door burst open. Theodore Roosevelt strode in, all 6 feet of entitled arrogance. With his brother Elliot trailing behind, both wore expensive suits and the kind of self-satisfaction that came from never having been denied anything. "Ladies," Theodore's voice boomed across the empty hall. "We're forming a posse to defend our fair town. Surely you'll want to show your appreciation for our brave efforts." His eyes found Clara, and his smile turned predatory. "Miss Edison, isn't it the Ohio rose trying to bloom in Montana soil? Perhaps you'd like to express your gratitude personally. The hall is closed on Sundays until evening. Mr. Roosevelt," Clara said coolly, continuing her work. "Come now, don't be coy." Theodore moved closer, his breath already tinged with whiskey despite the early hour. "A girl in your position should be more accommodating, especially when men are preparing to risk their lives." "My position?" Clara's hand stilled on the glass she was polishing. "Why, yes, a dance hall girl with no family, no connections, no protection." His hand reached for her arm. "You should be grateful for any attention from respectable men." The door opened again, and James Monroe's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Roosevelt, thought you'd be at the meeting point by now." Theodore's hand dropped, but his smile remained. "Just ensuring the ladies understand the gravity of the situation. Sheriff, can't be too careful with the McGraws on the loose." "Indeed." James's eyes found Clara's, and something dark flickered in their depths. "Which is why I need every man at his post. Now." The Roosevelt brothers left with obvious reluctance, Theodore throwing one last meaningful look at Clara. When they were gone, James approached the bar, his expression unreadable. "Miss Edison, I apologize for missing our appointment." "You have nothing to apologize for," Clara said quietly. "The town needs you." "The town?" He repeated the words as if they tasted bitter. "Yes, the town always needs something. Protection, justice, a symbol to make them feel safe." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internal. "I wonder sometimes if that's all I am anymore, a badge and a gun. Not a man." "You're more than that," Clara said without thinking. "You're—" Sheriff, Deputy Franklin Carnegie, appeared in the doorway. "Riders approaching from the north. Could be them." James transformed instantly, the weary man replaced by the lawman. "Positions, everyone. And Franklin, make sure the women and children are secured in the church." He turned back to Clara, and for a moment, his professional mask slipped. "Stay inside, please. Whatever happens, whatever you hear, stay inside." Then he was gone, leaving Clara with the echo of "please" a word that sounded foreign on his lips, as if he'd forgotten how to ask rather than command. The rest of the afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clara and Martha huddled in the hall with several other women who'd taken shelter there, listening to the occasional shout or sound of horses' hooves. The waiting was torture, not knowing if the next sound would be gunfire or the all clear. It was near sunset when they heard it, the sharp crack of rifles, the thunder of horses, men shouting orders and challenges. The battle for Silver Creek had begun. Clara pressed against the window, trying to see through the dust and confusion. She caught glimpses of the action, James directing his men from behind an overturned wagon, the Roosevelt brothers firing from the roof of the bank, riders wheeling and shooting in the orange light of dusk. "Get away from there!" Martha yanked her back. "You want to catch a stray bullet." But Clara couldn't stay away. Something drew her to watch, to witness this violence that might claim the man who'd held her so gently just 2 nights before. She saw James break cover, moving with lethal grace to a better position. Saw him raise his rifle, steady as stone despite the chaos around him. Then she saw the rider coming up behind him, gun raised. "No!" The word tore from her throat as she wrenched open the door and ran into the street. "James, behind you!" Her scream cut through the battle noise. James spun, firing in one fluid motion. The would-be ambusher toppled from his saddle, But the distraction cost him. Another outlaw's bullet caught James in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Clara ran to him, her fancy shoes slipping on the dusty street, her heart hammering against her ribs. She fell to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the spreading crimson stain. "What are you doing?" James gasped, his face pale with pain and fury. "I told you to stay inside. Saving your stubborn life," Clara shot back, tearing strips from her petticoat to staunch the bleeding. Around them, the battle continued to rage, but she was aware only of the man beneath her hands and the warm blood seeping through her fingers. Deputy Carnegie appeared, laying down covering fire. "Get him inside, I'll hold them." Together, Clara and another man dragged James into the nearest building, ironically, the Gilded Rose. They laid him on one of the gaming tables as Martha rushed for medical supplies. "You little fool," James muttered as Clara worked to stop the bleeding. "You could have been killed." "So could you," she countered, her hand surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "And then, who would have kept that promise about being my last dance?" Something shifted in his expression, pain giving way to wonder. He reached up with his good hand, fingers brushing her cheek and coming away wet with tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. "Clara," he began. But whatever he might have said was lost as the doctor arrived, pushing her aside with professional briskness. The battle ended as suddenly as it had begun. 2 of the McGraw brothers lay dead in the street, while the other 3 fled into the gathering darkness. Silver Creek had held, but at a cost, several men wounded, property damaged, and the illusion of safety shattered. As the doctor worked on James, Clara became aware of the stares and whispers. She looked down at herself, dress ruined with blood and dirt, hair wild, every inch the improper woman she was accused of being. But worse were the words she caught from the crowd gathering outside. "Saw her run right into the gunfight." "Distracting the sheriff like that? What do you expect from her kind?" "Could have gotten him killed." Mrs. Wellington, the banker's wife, pushed through the crowd like a battleship under full sail. "This is what comes of tolerating such establishments," she announced, her voice carrying clearly. "Decent men put at risk because of women who don't know their place." "Now hold on," Martha began. But Mrs. Wellington wasn't finished. "Sheriff Monroe is a good man, a protector of this town, and this creature nearly got him killed with her theatrical nonsense. Running into a gunfight, I ask you, what sort of proper woman would do such a thing? The sort who saves lives." James's voice, though weak, cut through the growing mob mentality. He was sitting up, arm in a sling, face drawn but determined. "Miss Edison's warning saved my life. I'd be dead if not for her quick thinking." "Sheriff," Mrs. Wellington's tone dripped false concern. "You're obviously overwrought from your injury. This woman..." James stood shakily, Clara moving instinctively to support him. "Showed more courage today than half the men who hid behind closed doors. I'll thank you not to disparage her in my presence." The crowd shifted uneasily. Supporting the sheriff was one thing. Supporting his defense of a dance hall girl was quite another. Clara felt the weight of their judgment like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders. "James," she said quietly, "you should rest." "No." His good arm tightened around her shoulders. "I've rested for 5 years, hidden behind duty and propriety and what this town expects. No more." He faced the crowd, gray eyes blazing with something that transcended physical pain. "Yes, Miss Edison works at the Gilded Rose. Yes, she danced with me. And yes, she ran into danger to save my life. If any of you have issue with that, you're welcome to find another sheriff." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, from the back of the crowd, Samuel Morse began to clap. Slowly, others joined in, not everyone, but enough. Enough to show that Silver Creek might be more than its prejudices. Mrs. Wellington huffed and swept away, several other respectable ladies following. But Clara barely noticed. She was too aware of James leaning against her, of the solid warmth of him, alive and whole despite the day's violence. Later, after the doctor had properly tended James's wound and the crowd had dispersed, Clara found herself alone with him in the quiet of the sheriff's office. He sat at his desk, looking exhausted but alert, while she perched nervously on the edge of a chair. "You should go home," he said finally. "Rest. It's been a trying day." "Is that what you want?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "For me to go. What I want," he paused, running his good hand through his hair. "What I want hasn't mattered for a long time. But today, when I saw you running toward me through the gunfire, all I could think was that I couldn't lose someone else. Not you. Not when I've just started to... Started to what?" "Feel alive again." The words hung between them, raw and honest. "These past 5 years, I've been going through the motions, protecting this town because it was easier than facing my own emptiness. Then you arrived, and suddenly I remembered what it was like to want something beyond the next sunrise." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "The town won't accept it. You heard Mrs. Wellington. I'm not the kind of woman a sheriff. I don't give a damn what the town accepts." The profanity, mild as it was, shocked them both. James almost smiled. "Catherine would laugh to hear me say that. She always said I cared too much about appearances. She sounds wonderful. She was... and she's gone." He met her eyes, unflinching. "I'll always carry that loss. But I'm tired of living in her shadow. Tired of being the grieving widower this town expects me to be." He stood, crossing to where she sat. With his good hand, he tilted her chin up, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. "I meant what I said at the dance, Clara, about being your last, but I need you to understand what that means. The McGraws will be back. There will always be another gang, another threat. Being with me means living with danger, with the judgment of people like Mrs. Wellington, with..." Clara stood, pressing her fingers to his lips to stop the flow of words. "I ran into a gunfight for you today. Do you really think I care about Mrs. Wellington's opinion?" For the first time since she'd known him, James Monroe truly smiled. It transformed his face, erasing years of grief and duty. "No, I suppose you don't. Then stop trying to talk me out of this and kiss me, Sheriff." He laughed a rusty sound, as if joy was a language he was relearning. Then his hand cupped her face, and he was kissing her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. It was nothing like she'd imagined, no desperate passion or claiming possession. Instead, it was gentle, almost reverent, as if he was afraid she might disappear. When they finally parted, both breathless, Clara saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "Sunday tea seems rather anticlimactic now," she murmured. "Perhaps, but I'd still like to try." He pressed his forehead to hers. "If you'll have me, Clara, knowing what it means, knowing the challenges we'll face." "I knew the moment you asked me to dance," she confessed. "I've been yours since that first waltz, James Monroe. Sheriff or not, town approval or not." Outside, Silver Creek settled into an uneasy night. Guards posted against the McGraw's return, but inside the sheriff's office, 2 wounded souls found comfort in each other's arms, building something new from the ashes of their pasts. The battle for Silver Creek had ended. The battle for their future had just begun. The following weeks unfolded like a careful dance between duty and desire. James Monroe's shoulder healed slowly, the wound a constant reminder of how quickly violence could shatter peaceful moments. Despite the town's watchful eyes and wagging tongues, he kept his promised Sunday tea at Mrs. Franklin's boarding house became a cherished ritual, even if half the curtains on Main Street twitched whenever he climbed those front steps. Clara poured tea with hands that barely trembled now, having grown accustomed to his presence in her small parlor. The afternoon sun slanted through lace curtains, painting golden patterns on the worn carpet as they sat across from each other, maintaining a proper distance that felt like miles. "You're getting better at this," James observed, accepting his cup with a slight smile. "First time, you nearly scalded my hand." "You make me nervous," Clara admitted, then blushed at her boldness. "Still do, if I'm honest." "Good nervous or bad nervous?" "Good," she said softly. "The kind that makes me feel alive." They developed their own language in these stolen hours, conversations that danced around deeper truths while building something steady and real. James told her about his childhood in Virginia, about learning to track from an old Cherokee scout, about the first time he'd pinned on a badge. Clara shared memories of her father's shop, the smell of fresh fabric and possibility, the devastation of watching it all disappear. "I have something for you," James said suddenly, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Clara's fingers fumbled with the string, and she gasped when the paper fell away. Inside lay a derringer pearl-handled, delicate enough for a woman's hand but deadly in its purpose. "James, I can't—" "You can and you will." His voice brooked no argument. "The McGraws are still out there. I won't always be around to protect you, and after what happened—" He touched his shoulder unconsciously. "I need to know you can defend yourself." "Teach me then," Clara challenged, chin lifting. "Don't just hand me a gun and hope for the best. Teach me to shoot properly." And so began another ritual. 3 mornings a week, before the town fully woke, they met at the edge of the canyon where the sound of gunfire wouldn't cause alarm. Clara proved a quick study, her hands steady and eye true. But it was the other lessons that mattered more: how to read a room for danger, how to position herself near exits, how to trust her instincts. "You're thinking too much," James corrected as she aimed at a row of bottles. "Feel the weight of it. Let it become part of your hand." Clara exhaled slowly, squeezing the trigger. The bottle exploded in a shower of glass. "Better." He moved behind her, adjusting her stance. "But you're still tensing your shoulders." His hands on her arms sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the morning chill. Clara forced herself to focus, to ignore the warmth of him, the scent of leather and soap that made her want to lean back into his embrace. "Like this," she fired again, another bottle shattering. "Perfect." His breath stirred the hair at her nape. "You're a natural, Clara Edison. I have a good teacher." She turned in his arms. "The lesson forgotten. Though I'm not sure Mrs. Wellington would approve of our educational methods." Mrs. Wellington disapproves of breathing if it's done improperly," James murmured, his hands settling on her waist. "I've stopped caring what she thinks." It was moments like these, stolen and precious, that sustained them through the harder times, because the disapproval was real and constant. Clara felt it every time she walked down Main Street, in the way conversations stopped and eyes followed. At the Gilded Rose, business had slowed as respectable men avoided being seen in the same establishment as the sheriff's scandalous interest. "You're costing me money, girl," the owner, Stanford White, complained one evening as Clara prepared for the dinner crowd. "Half my regulars won't come in anymore, afraid of what the sheriff might think." "Then perhaps they shouldn't have been here in the first place," Clara replied evenly, adjusting the pins in her hair. "Don't get smart with me." Stanford's face darkened. "You're not irreplaceable. Plenty of girls would be happy for your position." Martha stepped between them, her expression fierce. "You fire Clara. You lose me too, Stan, and good luck finding someone else who can manage your books proper." Stanford retreated, muttering about ungrateful women. But Clara knew the reprieve was temporary. She was walking a tightrope between worlds, belonging fully to neither. That night, as she served drinks and managed conversations with the remaining patrons, Clara caught snippets of talk that made her blood run cold. A heard from a trader out of Billings. The McGraws hit a bank there last week. And say they're gathering more men, planning something big. Ewing swore revenge on that sheriff in Silver Creek. She was still mulling over the information when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Not James. He never came to the Gilded Rose anymore, respecting the boundaries of their complicated situation. Instead, Theodore Roosevelt swaggered in, his brother Elliot close behind. Well, the sheriff's pet is still here. Theodore's smile held no warmth. Thought you'd have moved on to better accommodations by now. Clara continued wiping down the bar, refusing to rise to the bait. What can I get you, Mr. Roosevelt? Oh, I think you know what I want. He leaned across the bar, whiskey heavy on his breath. Same thing I wanted before Monroe started sniffing around. Question is, how much longer do you think his protection will last? As long as needed. James's voice came from the doorway, cold as winter steel. The saloon fell silent. James stood silhouetted against the night, badge glinting in the lamplight. He moved into the room with the controlled grace of a predator. And even Theodore Roosevelt stepped back. Sheriff. Theodore recovered quickly, pasting on a politician's smile. Just having a friendly conversation with Miss Edison. Didn't sound friendly to me. James positioned himself between Clara and the Roosevelt brothers. In fact, it sounded like a threat. Now. Elliot tried to mediate. Always the weaker of the two. No need for unpleasantness. We were just leaving. Good idea. James's hand rested casually on his gun belt. And boys, this is the last time I want to hear about either of you conversing with Miss Edison. Clear. Theodore's face flushed red, but he nodded curtly. The brothers left, but not before Theodore threw one last look over his shoulder, a promise that this wasn't over. When they were gone, James turned to Clara, his expression softening. You all right? I can handle myself, she said, though her hands trembled slightly. You taught me. Remember. Some threats can't be solved with a bullet. Clara. He glanced around the nearly empty saloon. Walk with me. She grabbed her shawl, ignoring Stanford's disapproving grunt, and followed James into the cool night air. They walked in silence until they reached the small park at the town's center, where a bench sat beneath an ancient oak. I heard talk tonight, Clara said as they settled onto the bench. About the McGraws. They're planning something. I know. James removed his hat, running fingers through his hair. Got word from the marshal's office yesterday. They've recruited more men, maybe a dozen total now, and they're headed this way. Fear clenched Clara's stomach. When? Soon. Maybe a week, maybe less. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Clara, I need you to consider leaving town until... No. Just hear me out. No, James! She turned to face him fully. I won't run. Not from them. Not from Mrs. Wellington. Not from anyone. This is my home now. You're my home now. Stubborn woman, he murmured, but there was admiration in his voice. What am I going to do with you? Love me, Clara said simply. That's all I ask. Love me despite the gossip, despite the danger, despite everything telling us this is impossible. James cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes intense in the moonlight. I already do. God help me. Clara, I love you more than I thought possible after Catherine. You've brought me back to life. Then we face whatever comes together. She leaned into his touch. The McGraws, the town, all of it, together. He kissed her then, there in the open where anyone could see, a public declaration more powerful than words. When they parted, both breathless. James reached into his pocket. I had something else for you besides the derringer. He produced a small silver locket, simple but elegant. It was my mother's. She gave it to Catherine when we married, and I want you to have it." Clara's throat constricted. "James, I couldn't. It should stay with the woman I love," he finished firmly. Catherine would understand. She'd want me to be happy again. He fastened the chain around Clara's neck, the metal cool against her skin. "Wear it for me." "Always," Clara whispered, touching the locket where it rested above her heart. They sat together on the bench as the town slept around them, two souls finding solace in each other despite the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The McGraws were coming, bringing violence and chaos. The town's disapproval hadn't abated, creating its own kind of battlefield. But in that moment, with James's arm around her shoulders and the weight of his mother's locket against her chest, Clara felt invincible. She'd found something worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that James felt the same. "Dance with me," she said suddenly. "Here now." James looked around the empty park. "There's no music." "We don't need music." Clara stood, holding out her hand as he had that first night. "We just need each other." James rose, a smile playing at his lips. "Have I ever told you you're quite mad, Miss Edison?" "Several times. Sheriff Monroe." She stepped into his arms. "Yet you keep coming back." "Always will," he murmured against her hair as they began to move in the silent waltz. "I swore to be your last dance. Remember, I keep my promises." They danced beneath the stars while Silver Creek slumbered, unaware that its sheriff and the dance hall girl had found something precious in each other, a love that would be tested by lead and prejudice, but refused to yield. In the distance, a wolf howled, wild and free. It might have been a warning or a celebration. Clara chose to believe it was both, a recognition that sometimes the greatest risks brought the greatest rewards. "I love you," she whispered into the night, into his shoulder, into the space between heartbeats. "And I love you," James replied, holding her closer. "Whatever comes next, remember that. I love you, Clara Edison, and I'll fight the whole world to keep you safe." The wolf howled again, closer now, and Clara shivered despite the warmth of James's embrace. The coming days would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But tonight, they had this a stolen dance in an empty park, two hearts beating as one, and love fierce enough to stand against whatever darkness approached. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. Tonight, they danced. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday, when Silver Creek lay vulnerable in the gray half-light between night and day. Clara woke to the thunder of hooves and the sharp crack of gunfire splitting the morning air. She scrambled from her bed, reaching for the derringer James had given her, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through her window at Mrs. Franklin's boarding house, she could see riders flooding Main Street, more than a dozen men, their faces masked, guns blazing. The McGraw gang had returned, and they'd brought an army. "Everyone down to the cellar, Mrs." Franklin's voice carried through the halls, shrill with panic. "Quickly now!" But Clara was already moving in the opposite direction, throwing on her dress and boots, tucking the small gun into her pocket. James was out there somewhere, facing this threat with whatever men he'd managed to gather. She couldn't hide while he risked his life. The street was chaos when she emerged. Windows shattered under the outlaw's assault, storefronts erupting in splinters of wood and glass. The bank's doors hung askew, and Clara could see figures moving inside. The robbery was already underway. She spotted James behind an overturned wagon near the sheriff's office, Franklin Carnegie beside him. Both men were returning fire, but they were vastly outnumbered. The Roosevelt brothers were nowhere to be seen so much for their brave talk of defending the town. A rider wheeled toward the wagon, gun raised, and Clara acted without thinking. The derringer appeared in her hand, steady despite her terror. She fired, and the man clutched his shoulder, his shot going wild. It wasn't a killing shot, but it was enough to send him retreating. James's head snapped around, his face a mask of fury and fear when he spotted her. "Clara, get back!" But there was no going back now. She ran toward him, staying low, using the techniques he'd taught her. A bullet whined past her ear, so close she felt its heat. Then she was diving behind the wagon, James's arms pulling her against him. "Damn it, Clara, I told you to stay safe." "And I told you we face things together," she shot back, checking her remaining bullets. Only one left. "Where is everyone? Where's the help?" "This is it," Franklin said grimly, reloading his rifle. "The others are protecting their own property. We're on our own." The situation was worse than Clara had imagined. 3 men against more than a dozen hardened outlaws. The McGraws had planned well, striking when the town was most vulnerable. "Sheriff Monroe," a voice called out over the gunfire. "I know you're listening." The shooting slowed, then stopped. In the eerie silence, a man emerged from the bank, tall, broad-shouldered, with cold blue eyes visible above his mask. William McGraw, the eldest brother, the one who'd orchestrated their reign of terror. "You killed 2 of my brothers," William continued, his voice carrying across the street. "Blood demands blood, Sheriff, but I'm a reasonable man. Send out the woman, and we'll finish our business here without any more killing." Clara felt James go rigid beside her. "The woman has nothing to do with this," he called back. "Oh, but she does." William's laugh was without humor. "See, word travels fast out here. The high and mighty Sheriff Monroe, brought low by a saloon girl. It's almost poetic. Your weakness gave us this opportunity." "Don't listen to him," Clara whispered. But James was already moving, checking his ammunition, his face set in grim lines. "You want blood. McGraw." James stood slowly, making himself a target. "Then face me, man to man. No one else needs to die today." "James, no!" Clara grabbed for him, but he gently pushed her hands away. "Trust me," he murmured. Then louder, "What do you say, McGraw, you and me, winner takes all." William considered this, head tilted like a predator studying prey. "And why would I do that when I have you outnumbered?" "Because you're not here for money," James said with deadly calm. "You could have hit any bank in the territory. You came here for revenge. Well, here I am, unless you're too yellow to face me yourself." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Clara could see the other outlaws shifting restlessly, waiting for their leader's response. Honor among thieves was a myth, but pride was real and dangerous. "All right, Sheriff." William stepped into the middle of the street. "You and me. When you're dead, my men leave peaceful like. You have my word. And if you lose—" "I won't." William's hand hovered near his gun. "But if by some miracle I do, my men ride out and don't come back." James started to rise, but Clara caught his arm. "You can't trust him. The moment you step out there—" "I know." He cupped her face briefly, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "But it's the only chance. Franklin, if anything happens, I'll keep her safe," the deputy promised grimly. "That's not what I was going to say." James managed a tight smile. "I was going to say, if anything happens, make sure she knows I meant every word, every promise." Then he was stepping over the wagon, walking into the street with the measured stride of a man facing his destiny. The rising sun painted the scene in shades of gold and shadow, 2 figures facing off while the town held its breath. Clara had seen James practice his draw hundreds of times, had marveled at the liquid speed of it. But William McGraw hadn't built his reputation on empty boasts. He was fast too, maybe faster. The 2 men faced each other, hands hovering over their guns, eyes locked in deadly concentration. The world seemed to pause, waiting. Then everything happened at once. William's hand moved first, a blur of motion, but James had been expecting it, had read the tell in the other man's shoulder. He drew and fired in one smooth motion. his bullet finding its mark even as William's shot sparked off the ground where James had been standing. William McGraw looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, surprise flickering across his face. Then he toppled backward, his gun falling from nerveless fingers. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the remaining McGraw brothers, Robert and John, burst from the bank, rage twisting their features. "You killed him!" Robert screamed, raising his rifle. "You killed our brother!" The fragile truce shattered. Gunfire erupted from all sides as the outlaws abandoned any pretense of honor. James dove for cover as bullets filled the air where he'd been standing. Clara didn't think she acted. Grabbing Franklin's spare pistol, she emerged from behind the wagon, firing at the outlaws threatening James. Her shots weren't expert, but they were enough to force the attackers to seek cover. "The church!" James shouted over the noise. "Everyone to the church!" It was a fighting retreat, the three of them backing toward the stone building while keeping up covering fire. Clara had never been so terrified in her life, but alongside the fear was something else, a fierce determination to protect the man she loved. They almost made it. The church doors were just yards away when Clara felt the impact, a punch to her side that spun her around. There was no pain at first, just surprise as her legs gave out and she found herself on the ground, staring up at the morning sky. "Clara!" James's voice seemed to come from very far away. Then he was there, gathering her into his arms, his face twisted with anguish. "No, no, no! Stay with me, sweetheart! Stay with me!" "James..." She tried to speak, but her voice came out weak. Something warm and wet was spreading across her dress. "I'm sorry, I should have stayed." "Don't you dare apologize." His hands pressed against her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Franklin, get the doctor." The deputy ran for help while James held her, his body shielding her from the continuing gunfire. Clara could hear shouts, more shooting, but it all seemed distant and unimportant compared to the gray eyes above her, filled with tears she'd never seen him shed. "You promised," she whispered. "My last dance." "And I'll keep that promise." His voice broke. "You're going to be fine. Clara, you have to be fine. I can't lose you too. I can't." The world was fading at the edges, darkness creeping in. But Clara held on, anchored by his voice, his touch, the desperate love in his eyes. She'd come so far, survived so much. She wouldn't give up now. The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her was James's voice, raised in a roar of rage and grief, and then the thunder of many guns firing at once. When Clara woke, the first thing she noticed was the pain, a deep, throbbing ache in her side that made breathing difficult. The second thing was the hand holding hers, warm and familiar and wonderfully alive. "James," her voice came out as barely a whisper. "I'm here." He leaned forward, and she could see the exhaustion etched on his face, the stubble of several days without shaving. "I'm right here, sweetheart. You're safe. The McGraws." "Gone?" His jaw tightened. "Dead or captured. The marshal arrived with reinforcements just in time. It's over. Clara, it's finally over." She tried to sit up, gasped at the spike of pain. James gently pushed her back down. "Easy. Doc Holliday says the bullet missed anything vital, but you lost a lot of blood. You need to rest." "How long?" 3 days. His hand tightened on hers. 3 of the longest days of my life. I thought... He stopped, unable to finish. "But you didn't lose me." Clara said softly, "I'm still here. James, still yours." "The town." He hesitated, then continued. "They saw what you did, how you fought beside me, how you risked everything. Mrs. Wellington herself has been here twice, bringing soup and asking after your health." Clara almost laughed, then thought better of it when her side protested. "Mrs. Wellington making soup for a dance hall girl." Former dance hall girl. James corrected. Stanford White made it clear your position was terminated the moment you ran into that gunfight. But somehow, I don't think you'll miss it. No, Clara agreed. I found what I was looking for the night you asked me to dance. Everything else was just marking time. James lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. Marry me. The words hung in the air between them, simple and perfect. What? Marry me, Clara Edison. His eyes were intense, all shields dropped. I've spent 3 days sitting here, watching you fight for your life, and all I could think was how much time I've wasted, how stupid I've been, letting convention and propriety keep us apart. I love you. I want you to be my wife, to face whatever comes next together, not a sheriff and dance hall girl, but as husband and wife. Clara's eyes filled with tears. James Monroe, are you proposing to me while I'm lying in a sickbed, looking like death warmed over? You've never looked more beautiful to me, he said seriously. Because you're alive, because you're here, because you're mine, if you'll have me. Yes. The word came out on a sob. Yes, of course, yes. Though you might have asked when I could properly kiss you without fear of tearing my stitches. He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. I'll wait as long as it takes to claim that kiss. Future Mrs. Monroe, I've gotten good at waiting where you're concerned. Over the next weeks, Clara healed slowly but surely. The town's attitude toward her had shifted dramatically, saving the sheriff's life while taking a bullet had transformed her from scandalous woman to local heroine. Even Theodore Roosevelt had sent flowers, though Clara suspected that had more to do with political calculation than genuine sentiment. The wedding was set for autumn, when Clara would be fully recovered. James had offered to make it a grand affair, but Clara wanted something simple, just them, their closest friends, and the promises that would bind them together. Are you sure? He asked one evening as they sat on the porch of his house, their house. Soon. You deserve a proper wedding, with all the trimmings. I have everything I need right here, Clara assured him, leaning carefully against his shoulder. Besides, we've already had our grand moment. Our first dance was more meaningful than any wedding reception could be. About that. James shifted, reaching into his pocket. I have something for you. He produced a small music box, delicate and beautiful. When he wound the key, a familiar melody began to play the same waltz they danced to that first night. How did you, Had it made special in Denver? He admitted, looking almost shy. I wanted you to have it, so you'd always remember. As if I could forget. Clara took the music box reverently, tears pricking her eyes. James, it's perfect. Not quite. He stood, offering his hand. Dance with me. Doc Holliday said no strenuous activity. She protested, though she was already taking his hand. We'll be careful, he promised, drawing her gently to her feet. Just a slow turn around the porch. I need to keep in practice if I'm going to dance with my wife at our wedding. They moved together in the fading light, careful of her healing wound, the music box playing their song. It was nothing like their first dance, no audience, no judgment, no uncertainty. Just two people who'd found their way through violence and prejudice to something precious and true. I love you, Clara murmured against his chest. Thank you for keeping your promise. Which one? He asked, though she could hear the smile in his voice. All of them, but especially the one about being my last dance. Forever and always, James confirmed, holding her close. No more first dances for you, Clara Monroe. From now on, they're all with me. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Silver Creek settled into evening, peaceful now with the threat of the McGraws ended, and on the porch of the sheriff's house, two lovers danced to the tune of a music box, writing their own story of redemption and second chances. The dance hall girl and the grieving sheriff had found their way home to each other. The dust had barely settled from the McGraw gang's assault when word came down from Helena the two surviving brothers had escaped during transport to the territorial prison. Robert and John McGraw had vanished into the Badlands like smoke, leaving two dead marshals and a promise of vengeance carved into the wall of their cell. Monroe dies last. James received the news on a crisp October morning, 2 weeks before the wedding. Clara watched his face harden as he read the telegram, saw the way his hand instinctively moved to his gun. "They're coming back," she said. It wasn't a question. "Not if I find them first." He set the telegram aside, already reaching for his rifle. "Franklin, gather the men. We're riding out at dawn." "James? No." Clara stood, ignoring the twinge in her still-healing side. "That's exactly what they want to draw you out, to make you hunt them on their terms. I can't sit here waiting for them to strike. Clara, not with our wedding." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I won't have our day tainted by their shadow." "Then let me help." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I've been practicing with the rifle. My wound's nearly healed. I can—" "Absolutely not." His voice cut like a blade. "I almost lost you once. I won't risk it again." They stared at each other across the kitchen table, two stubborn souls locked in silent battle. Finally. Clara looked away. "Fine, but promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back." "Always," he said softly, pulling her into his arms. "I'll always come back to you." But as dawn broke and Clara watched him ride out with his posse, she couldn't shake the feeling that this time might be different. The McGraw brothers weren't common outlaws. They were predators, cunning and vicious. And they had personal stakes now. For 3 days. Clara went through the motions of wedding preparation. Martha helped her with the final alterations to her dress, not white, which would have been hypocritical, but a soft blue that brought out her eyes. Mrs. Wellington, in her newfound support, organized the church flowers. Even Doc Holliday insisted on contributing, offering to play violin for the ceremony. But at night, Clara lay awake listening for hoofbeats, for any sign of James's return. The music box sat on her bedside table, its melody a bittersweet reminder of promises made and dangers faced. On the 4th day, she couldn't stand it anymore. "Where are you going?" Martha demanded as Clara strapped on her gun belt, now modified to accommodate both the Derringer and a Colt .45 she'd purchased with her savings. "To find them." Clara said simply, "I know these men. Martha, they won't face James in a fair fight. They'll ambush him, hurt him, make him suffer for what happened to William." "Clara Edison, you're being a fool. You don't even know where to look." But Clara did know. During her recovery, she'd studied maps of the territory, learned the hiding spots and hidden trails from Franklin. And last night, a traveling tinker had mentioned seeing riders near Copper Canyon, the same place where James had first confronted the McGraws months ago. "They'll go back there," she said with certainty. Outlaws always return to familiar ground when cornered. It's human nature. "It's suicide, is what it is." Martha grabbed her arm. "You think James will thank you for getting yourself killed?" "I think," Clara said quietly, "that James would do the same for me, and I can't sit here in safety while he risks everything. I won't." She left before Martha could mount further arguments. Saddling the mare James had given her and riding out into the afternoon sun, the weight of the guns at her hip was reassuring, as was the knife tucked into her boot. James had trained her well, but training and real combat were different things entirely. The ride to Copper Canyon took most of the day. Clara pushed hard, knowing every hour counted. As the sun began its descent, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and gold, she dismounted and approached on foot, using every skill James had taught her about moving silently through rough terrain. She heard them before she saw them, voices carrying on the still air. So, should be here soon. Scout saw their dust trail an hour back. Clara's blood chilled. An ambush, just as she'd feared. She crept closer, using a cluster of boulders for cover, until she could see the scene below. The McGraw brothers had chosen their spot well, a narrow section of the canyon where riders would be forced into single file. Perfect for picking off a posse one by one. They'd positioned themselves on the high ground, rifles ready, with clear sight lines to the approach. But they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed any threat would come from below. Clara studied the situation, her mind racing. She couldn't take on both brothers alone, that would be foolish. But she could even the odds, warn James before he rode into the trap. Moving carefully, she worked her way around to a position above Robert McGraw. The younger brother was focused entirely on the canyon entrance, his attention fixed on his coming revenge. He never heard her approach. The rock Clara dropped was small, but well aimed. It struck Robert's temple with a dull thud, and he slumped forward, unconscious but alive. One down. John McGraw spun at the sound, his eyes widening as he spotted Clara. "You Monroe's whore!" The slur might have stung once. Now it just made her angry. "His fiancée, actually," she corrected, drawing her Colt in one smooth motion. "And you're going to drop that rifle." John laughed, an ugly sound. "You think you can take me? Little girl, I've killed more men than you've danced with." "Maybe," Clara admitted, keeping her gun trained on him. "But I'm not trying to take you. I'm just keeping you busy." Understanding dawned in John's eyes a second before he heard the hoofbeats. James and his posse thundered into view. But instead of riding into the trap, they split formation, flanking the canyon walls. "Clara?" James's voice echoed off the rocks, a mixture of fury and fear. "Get down!" John McGraw snarled, swinging his rifle toward her. Clara didn't hesitate. She fired. The Colt bucking in her hand, her shot went wide, but it was enough to spoil his aim. His bullet sparked off the rocks near her shoulder as she dove for cover. Then James was there, having somehow scaled the canyon wall with impossible speed. His gun was drawn, his face a mask of controlled rage. "Drop it, McGraw. It's over." Like hell, John spun toward him, finger tightening on the trigger. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. John McGraw crumpled, his rifle falling from nerveless fingers. But James staggered too, his left arm blooming red. "James!" Clara scrambled to him, her hands immediately going to the wound. "How bad?" "Just a graze," he said through gritted teeth, though his face had gone pale. "Clara, what the hell were you thinking? I told you to stay." "To stay safe, I know." She tore strips from her riding skirt to bind his arm. "But you were riding into an ambush. They knew you were coming, had it all planned out. If I hadn't—" "You could have been killed," he interrupted, catching her hands. "Clara, I can't. If something happened to you because of me—" "Something almost happened to you because of them," she countered. "James, we're going to be married. That means we're partners. In everything. You can't protect me by pushing me away." Below, Franklin and the others had secured the unconscious Robert McGraw. Doc Holliday was already climbing up to check James's wound, but Clara only had eyes for the man in front of her. This stubborn, brave, infuriating man who'd changed her life. "You're right," James said finally, wonderingly. "God help me, you're right. I've been trying to keep you safe by keeping you separate. But that's not what partners do." "No," Clara agreed. "It's not." He cupped her face with his good hand, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "You tracked them here, set up a distraction. Saved my life. Again." "I'm starting to make a habit of it," she said, trying for lightness despite the tears threatening to fall. "Clara Edison," he said seriously, "you are the most magnificent, terrifying woman I've ever known." "Terrifying?" "Absolutely terrifying," he confirmed, "and I love you more than words can say." This time, when he kissed her, it was different. There was partnership in it, equality, a recognition that they were stronger together than apart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Doc Holliday cleared his throat pointedly. "If you two are quite finished, I'd like to look at that arm before the sheriff bleeds to death on his wedding day." The ride back to Silver Creek was subdued but victorious. Robert McGraw, once conscious, had been thoroughly defeated by the sight of his brother's body. He'd surrendered without further fight, all the vengeance drained out of him. "It's really over," Clara marveled as they rode side by side, James's arm in a sling but his spirits high. "Thanks to you," he said. "Though if you ever scare me like that again—" "You'll what?" she challenged, grinning. "Arrest me." "Worse," he said solemnly. "I'll tell Martha you're planning to wear men's trousers to the wedding." Clara laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me, future Mrs. Monroe." They rode on in comfortable silence, the setting sun painting their path home. Behind them lay violence and vengeance, the last gasps of a past that had tried to destroy them. Ahead waited their wedding, their future, their life together. "James," Clara said as Silver Creek came into view. "I want to change our wedding vows." He turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Oh, I want to promise to stand beside you, not behind you, to face whatever comes together, as equals. Can we do that?" James reached over with his good hand, capturing hers. "Clara, I wouldn't have it any other way." 2 weeks later, on a crystalline October morning, Clara Edison walked down the aisle of Silver Creek's small church. She wore her blue dress with pride, the mother-of-pearl locket at her throat, the derringer tucked discreetly in her bouquet because old habits died hard, and a girl could never be too prepared. James waited at the altar, his arm healed, his eyes bright with emotion. Franklin stood as his best man, while Martha served as Clara's matron of honor, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. The church was packed. Word of Clara's heroics had spread throughout the territory, transforming her from scandal to legend. Even Mrs. Wellington sat in the front row, having completely revised her opinion on what constituted a proper woman. When it came time for the vows, Reverend Whitman looked slightly puzzled at the modified words, but continued gamely on. "Do you, James Monroe, take Clara Edison as your equal partner in life, to stand beside her in joy and sorrow, in peace and conflict, in dance halls and gunfights, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," James said firmly, his eyes never leaving Clara's. "And do you, Clara Edison, take James Monroe as your equal partner in life, to stand beside him in joy and sorrow, in peace and conflict, in upholding the law and occasionally bending it for the greater good, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife, partners in all things. Sheriff, you may kiss your bride." As James drew her close, Clara heard him murmur, "Ready for that last dance, Mrs. Monroe?" "With you," she whispered back. "Always." They kissed to thunderous applause, sealing a union forged in fire and tested by lead, stronger for having survived both. When they turned to face their community, Clara saw not judgment but acceptance, not scandal but celebration. The reception was held at the Gilded Rose Stanford White's wedding gift, offered with grudging respect. Doc Holliday played his violin while couples danced. The hall transformed from a place of loneliness to one of joy. As James led Clara onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife, the crowd parted respectfully. The music began their waltz, the one that had started it all. "No stepping on my toes this time," Clara teased as they began to move. "No promises," James replied, but his steps were sure, his hand steady on her waist. "Mrs. Monroe." "Yes, Mr. Monroe." "Thank you." "For what?" for seeing past the badge to the man, for refusing to let me hide, for saving my life in more ways than one. He spun her gracefully, then drew her back. For being my last dance. Clara's eyes misted. Thank you for being mine. They danced as the sun set over Silver Creek, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Around them, their friends and neighbors celebrated, but Clara was aware only of James, his warmth, his strength, his love. The dance hall girl from Ohio had found her home. The grieving sheriff had found his heart, and together, they'd found something worth fighting for, a love that could weather any storm, survive any bullet, and dance through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the music swelled and James dipped her dramatically, earning cheers from the crowd, Clara laughed with pure joy. This was what she'd traveled west to find, though she hadn't known it at the time. Not just survival or respectability, but partnership. Not just safety, but adventure. Not just love, but a love worth riding into danger for. I love you, she told her husband as he pulled her back up. And I love you, he replied, holding her close as the music played on. Forever and always, my darling Clara, my last dance. The stars came out over Montana, blessing the union of two souls who'd found their way through darkness to light, and, in the gilded rose, they danced on, writing the first chapter of a story that would echo through Silver Creek's history, the tale of the sheriff and the dance hall girl who'd saved each other in every way two people could. The letter arrived on a bitter November morning, 3 weeks after the wedding. Clara found it slipped under the door of the sheriff's office, her name written in an unfamiliar hand. Inside, a single line that made her blood run cold. Your husband killed my brothers. Now I'll take what he loves most. J. McGraw. John McGraw had escaped. During a routine transfer to the territorial prison, he'd overpowered his guards and vanished into the Montana wilderness. Now he was back, and the threat was no longer against James. It was against her. We're leaving, James said immediately when she showed him the letter. His face had gone pale, his jaw tight with barely controlled fear. Tonight, I'll wire the marshal in California. Get us safe passage. No. Clara set the letter aside with steady hands, though her heart raced. We're not running. James. Clara, this isn't about pride. John McGraw is different from his brothers. He's patient, calculating. He'll wait for the perfect moment. Then we'll be ready for him. She moved to the window, studying the quiet street. If we run now, we'll spend our whole lives looking over our shoulders. Is that the marriage you want? James crossed to her, his hands settling on her shoulders. The marriage I want is one where you're alive and safe. And the marriage I want is one where we face our problems together, not flee from them. She turned in his arms, meeting his tortured gaze. We've already proven we're stronger together than apart. Let's end this, James, once and for all. The argument that followed was their first as husband and wife, heated, painful, but ultimately necessary. James wanted to lock her away, to stand guard himself until McGraw was caught. Clara insisted on maintaining their normal routine, refusing to let fear dictate their lives. He wants us scared, she argued. Wants us jumping at shadows. That's when we'll make mistakes. In the end, they compromised. Clara would continue her daily activities, but never alone. Franklin Carnegie became her constant shadow, while James coordinated with the surrounding towns to tighten the net around McGraw. But days passed with no sign of the outlaw. The tension grew thick as winter fog, affecting everyone. Business at the general store where Clara had taken a respectable position slowed as people stayed indoors. Even the Gilded Rose saw fewer patrons, everyone sensing the storm about to break. It was Martha who brought the crucial information, bustling into the store on a Thursday afternoon with gossip fresh from the morning stage. That new photographer, Alexander Bell, the one who came to town last week. She leaned in conspiratorially. "Bertha from the boarding house says he's been asking all sorts of questions about you and the sheriff, wanting to know your routines, when you're alone." Clara's pulse quickened. A photographer, perfect cover for someone studying the town. "What does he look like?" "Thin, dark hair, keeps to himself, has those strange pale eyes that seem to look right through you." Martha trailed off, seeing Clara's expression. "It's him, isn't it, McGraw?" "Maybe?" Clara's mind raced. If McGraw was posing as the photographer, he'd been in town for days, watching, planning. "Martha, I need you to do something for me, but James can't know." "Clara Monroe, what are you planning?" "To end this." Clara glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "McGraw wants me isolated, vulnerable, so we're going to give him exactly what he wants or what he thinks he wants." The plan was dangerous, possibly foolish, but Clara was tired of being hunted. That evening, she convinced James she needed time alone to visit the church, to pray for guidance. He reluctantly agreed, assigning Franklin to wait outside. But Clara didn't go to the church. Instead, she slipped out the back door and made her way to the photographer's studio on the edge of town. If she was wrong, she'd apologize to Mr. Bell for the intrusion. If she was right. The studio was dark, seemingly empty. Clara pushed open the door, her hand resting on the Colt at her hip. Inside, the space was cluttered with photography equipment, the sharp smell of chemicals hanging in the air. "I wondered when you'd come." The voice came from the shadows, and John McGraw stepped into view. He'd changed, lost weight, grown a beard, but the cold hatred in his eyes was unmistakable. "Hello, John?" Clara said calmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I got your letter." "Brave of you to come alone." He moved closer, a predator stalking prey. "Or stupid, I haven't decided which." "Neither," Clara replied. "I came to make you an offer." That stopped him. "What kind of offer?" "Leave tonight. Disappear. Never come back to Montana. And we'll let you go." She kept her voice steady. "Reasonable. You've lost your brothers. John, don't lose your life, too." McGraw laughed, an ugly sound. "Let me go. You think you're in a position to make offers?" His hand moved toward his gun. "I could kill you right now. Let Monroe find your body. Let him feel what I felt." "You could," Clara agreed, "but you won't." "No? No, because you don't just want me dead. You want James to suffer first. You want him to know it's coming, to feel helpless." She took a step closer, gambling everything on her read of his character. "That's why you've been watching, planning. You could have shot me any time this week, but you didn't." McGraw's eyes narrowed. "Maybe I was waiting for the perfect moment." "Or maybe," Clara said softly, "you're tired too. Tired of running, of hating, of living for nothing but revenge. Your brothers are gone. John, killing me won't bring them back." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even regret. Then his face hardened. "You're right about one thing. I do want Monroe to suffer. And he will, when he finds out how you died slowly, painfully, because you were fool enough to face me alone." "She's not alone." The voice came from behind McGraw. James stepped from the back room, his gun drawn and aimed. Franklin appeared at the front door, rifle ready. They'd been there all along, waiting. "You knew," McGraw said to Clara, something like respect in his voice. "I suspected," she corrected. "My husband and I don't keep secrets anymore." When I told him my plan, he insisted on backup. "Though she nearly gave me a heart attack," James added, never taking his eyes off McGraw. "Drop the gun, John, it's over." McGraw stood frozen, calculating odds. 3 guns to his 1. No cover, no escape. But Clara could see the moment he decided death was preferable to capture. His hand twitched toward his weapon. "Don't!" Clara stepped between the men, her own gun drawn but pointed at the floor. "Please, John, choose life." "Get out of the way, Clara," James ordered, but she held her ground. "No, I've seen enough killing. We've all seen enough." She looked at McGraw, really looked at him past the outlaw to the man beneath. "You loved your brothers. That's not a crime. But they chose their path, and it led to death. You can choose differently." "They were all I had," McGraw said, his voice cracking. "William raised me after our parents died. Robert was going to be a doctor before—" He stopped, shoulders sagging. "What's the point now without them? I'm nothing." "That's not true," Clara said gently. "You're alive. You can start over. Be something more than just another McGraw brother, but only if you put down the gun." The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara felt James behind her, coiled to act if needed. Franklin held steady at the door, and John McGraw stood at the crossroads between life and death, revenge and redemption. Finally, slowly, he let his gun fall to the floor. "I'm tired," he said simply. "So damn tired." Franklin moved in to secure the weapon while James kept his gun trained on McGraw. But Clara saw what the men missed: the complete defeat in John's posture, the way the fight had simply drained out of him. "Thank you," she said quietly. McGraw met her eyes. "I would have killed you. You know that, right? If you'd really been alone—" "I know," Clara acknowledged. "But I wasn't alone. I never am anymore." They took John McGraw into custody without further incident. He would stand trial, serve his time, but he would live. As they walked back to the sheriff's office, James caught Clara's arm. "That was incredibly risky," he said, though his tone held more admiration than anger. "Yes," she agreed, "but it worked. You could have just let us arrest him at the studio. Why the confrontation?" Clara considered her answer. "Because I needed him to choose, to step back from that edge. Your Catherine, she sounds like someone who believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. I wanted to honor that." James stopped walking, staring at her in the lamplight. "You continue to surprise me. Clara Monroe." "Good," she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "I'd hate to become predictable." Later that night, as they lay in their bed, James traced lazy patterns on Clara's shoulder. "What you said to McGraw about choosing life, is that what we did choose life over the past?" "Every day," Clara murmured against his chest. "We choose it every day." The trial of John McGraw made headlines throughout the territory. He pled guilty to all charges, showing genuine remorse that surprised everyone who remembered the vicious McGraw gang. At sentencing, he made an unexpected request to speak privately with Clara. "Are you sure?" James asked as they waited outside the prisoner's cell. "He can't hurt me now," Clara said, though she appreciated James's protective instincts. "And I think he needs this." The conversation was brief but profound. John McGraw, shackled but somehow more free than he'd been in years, looked her in the eye. "I hated you," he said simply. "Hated everything you represented, the woman who'd softened the man who killed my brothers. And now I think maybe that softness saved my life." He shifted, chains clanking. "I'm getting 15 years. Could have been the rope. Your testimony about choosing redemption." The judge listened. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Clara said. "Not everyone takes it." McGraw studied her. "Take care of him. Mrs. Monroe, your husband. He's a good man, better than any of us McGraws ever were." "I will," Clara promised. "And John, write to me sometime. Let me know how you're doing." His surprise was evident. "Why would you care?" "Because someone should," she said simply. As they left the jail, James took her hand. "You're remarkable, you know that." "I'm practical," Clara corrected. John McGraw alive in prison is better than John McGraw martyred like his brothers. Maybe in 15 years, he'll be a different man. And in the meantime, Clara said, squeezing his hand, we live our lives. We keep the peace in Silver Creek. We dance at the Gilded Rose on Saturday nights. We make this town a place where people can find second chances. The winter that followed was the happiest of Clara's life. With the McGraw threat ended, she and James settled into the rhythms of married life. She kept her job at the general store, becoming known for her fair dealings and kind manner. James continued as sheriff, his reputation enhanced by the peaceful resolution of the McGraw situation. They hosted dinners for Franklin and his new bride. They attended church socials where Mrs. Wellington now introduced Clara as our brave Mrs. Monroe. They danced at the Gilded Rose, where Martha had been promoted to manager and ruled with an iron fist in a velvet glove. On quiet evenings, they sat by their fire, planning a future that seemed impossibly bright. James spoke of building a school, of making Silver Creek a place families would want to settle. Clara dreamed of a library, of bringing culture and learning to the frontier. We could make a difference here, she said one night, watching the flames dance. Real, lasting change. We already have, James reminded her, pulling her close. You changed me, Clara, brought me back from the dead. Everything else is just details. But Clara knew it was more than that. They'd changed each other, changed the town's perception of what was possible. A dance hall girl and a grieving sheriff had become pillars of the community, proof that redemption and second chances were more than just pretty words. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell soft and silent over Silver Creek, they stood at their window watching the town celebrate. Lanterns glowed in windows, families gathered for festivities, and peace settled over the valley like a benediction. No regrets, James asked, his arms wrapped around her from behind. Not one, Clara said firmly. Oh, wait, I do have one regret. What's that? She turned in his arms, smiling. I regret that you can't be my first dance anymore. You're stuck being my last dance, forever and always. James laughed, spinning her into an impromptu waltz right there in their parlor. I think I can live with that particular burden. Mrs. Monroe. They danced as the snow fell, as Silver Creek celebrated Christmas. As somewhere in a territorial prison, John McGraw penned his first letter to the woman who'd saved his life. They danced because they could, because they'd earned this joy through blood and bullets, through courage and compassion. And in that moment, Clara knew with bone-deep certainty that every hard choice, every danger faced, every prejudice overcome had been worth it. She'd come west seeking survival and found so much more love, purpose, a home, and a partner who saw her not as a fallen woman or a prize to be protected, but as an equal in every way that mattered. Merry Christmas, James, she whispered as they swayed together. Merry Christmas, Clara, he replied, holding her close. My love, my partner, my last dance. Outside, Silver Creek slept peaceful under its blanket of snow, guarded by a sheriff and his wife who'd proven that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in pulling a trigger, but in choosing love over fear, forgiveness over revenge, and hope over the shadows of the past. The spring thaw brought more than melting snow to Silver Creek. It brought a letter that would shatter the careful peace Clara and James had built. She found it on her desk at the general store, addressed in James's own hand but posted from Denver. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, recognizing immediately that something was terribly wrong. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then I've broken my promise to always come back to you. By the time this letter reaches Silver Creek, I'll be following a trail that may lead nowhere or to my death. But I cannot stand by while injustice threatens everything we've built together. The truth about the Roosevelt brothers has finally come to light. They weren't just arrogant landowners, they've been behind half the criminal activity in the territory, including funding the McGraw gang. I have proof. Clara, enough to bring them down, but they have judges, marshals, even territorial governors in their pockets. I'm going after them alone. I've told no one, not even Franklin. This isn't official law business, this is personal. They use their crimes to try to destroy us, to take you from me. I can't let that stand. I know you'll be angry. I know this goes against everything we promised about facing things together. But some battles must be fought alone, and I won't risk you again. Not for this. I love you more than life itself. If I don't return, know that every moment with you was worth whatever comes next. Dance for me, Clara. Dance and be happy. Forever your last dance, James. The letter fell from Clara's numb fingers. 3 days. The postmark showed James had mailed this 3 days ago. 3 days of him facing God knows what while she'd been going about her routine, thinking he was on a routine prisoner transport to Billings. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No!" Martha burst through the door, alarmed by Clara's cry. "What's wrong? What's happened?" Clara was already moving, grabbing her coat, checking her weapons. James is in trouble. The Roosevelt brothers, they're criminals, and James went after them alone. Alone, but that's... Martha stopped, seeing Clara's expression. "What do you need?" "Franklin, now. And telegraph the marshal's office in Denver. Tell them Sheriff Monroe is in danger." Clara strapped on her gun belt with practiced efficiency. "And Martha, if I don't come back..." "Don't you dare finish that sentence," Martha snapped. "You're coming back, and you're bringing that fool husband of yours with you. Now go." Within an hour, Clara had gathered what she needed. Franklin, loyal despite his sheriff's deception, had immediately agreed to help. Doc Holliday insisted on coming too, grumbling about fool heroes, but packing his medical bag alongside his rifles. Even Samuel Morse volunteered, his knowledge of telegraph lines potentially crucial for tracking James's path. But it was the unexpected addition to their group that proved most valuable. As they prepared to ride out, a familiar figure appeared, Theodore Roosevelt himself, looking haggard and haunted. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, his usual arrogance replaced by something like fear. "We need to talk." Franklin's gun was in his hand instantly. "Give me one reason not to shoot you where you stand." "Because," Theodore said quietly, "I know where my brother has your sheriff, and I want to help you save him." Clara studied him, reading the truth in his exhausted face. "Why?" "Because Elliot has gone too far. The money, the schemes, I could justify those. But this," he shook his head, "he plans to torture Monroe, make an example of him. I may be many things, Mrs. Monroe, but I'm not a murderer." "Where?" Clara's voice was steel. "The old Riverside mine, abandoned since the cave-in of '81. Elliot has men there, maybe a dozen, professional killers, not local thugs." Theodore met her eyes. "I'll guide you there, help however I can. After that, I'll face whatever justice demands." Clara made her decision instantly. "Franklin, tie his hands but let him ride. If this is a trap..." "It's not," Theodore insisted. "Whatever else you think of me, I loved my brother, but the Elliot I knew died years ago, consumed by greed and power. The thing wearing his face now, that's not my brother anymore." They rode hard through the day and into the night, following Theodore's directions through increasingly rough terrain. The abandoned mine lay in a valley accessible only through a treacherous mountain pass, perfect for hiding criminal activities. As dawn broke, they halted on a ridge overlooking the mine, even from a distance. Clara could see guards posted, horses corralled, smoke rising from what had once been the mine office, somewhere down there. James was prisoner if he still lived. "How do we get in?" Franklin asked, studying the layout. "There's an old ventilation shaft on the eastern side." Theodore offered. "It leads into the lower tunnels. Small group could get through, come up inside their perimeter." "It's a good plan," Clara said, already mentally preparing. "Franklin, You and Doc create a distraction from the west. Draw their attention. Theodore and I will—" "Like hell," Franklin interrupted. "You're not going down there with him." "I'm the smallest," Clara pointed out practically. "The shaft might be too narrow for you. And I'm the best shot after James." "She's right," Doc said reluctantly, "though I hate admitting it." "Besides," Clara added, checking her weapons one last time, "Theodore needs watching, and who better than someone with very personal reasons to shoot him if he betrays us?" Theodore actually smiled at that. "Practical. I see why Monroe married you." They waited until full daylight, when the guards would be tired from the night watch. Then Franklin and Doc opened fire from the western ridge, their shots carefully placed to create maximum chaos without hitting anyone. As expected, most of the guards rushed toward the threat, leaving the eastern approach less defended. Clara and Theodore made their way to the ventilation shaft. It was even narrower than expected, barely wide enough for Clara to squeeze through. Theodore had to remove his jacket and gun belt to fit. The tunnels were dark, treacherous, half flooded from spring runoff. Clara led with her pistol drawn, every sense alert. Behind her, Theodore moved with surprising stealth for such a large man. "Why did Elliot hire the McGraws?" she asked quietly as they navigated the maze of passages. "William McGraw knew something that could destroy us," Theodore admitted. "About a railroad deal that wasn't entirely legal. Elliot thought hiring them for small jobs would keep them quiet. Instead, it gave them leverage. And when James killed William, Elliot panicked, encouraged the revenge plot, hoping the McGraws would eliminate Monroe before any investigation could begin." His voice held genuine regret. "I should have stopped it then. Should have seen how far Elliot had fallen." They emerged into a larger chamber where voices echoed from ahead. Clara held up a hand. "Listening." "Should just kill him and be done with it. Boss wants him alive for now. Says the sheriff has information we need." "Information he hasn't said a word except to ask for water." Clara's heart leaped. James was alive. Hurt, certainly, but alive. They crept forward until they could see into the main chamber. James sat tied to a chair, his face bloodied but defiant. Elliot Roosevelt paced before him, clearly frustrated. "You had to interfere," Elliot was saying. "Couldn't just enjoy your little romance and leave well enough alone. Do you know how much money you've cost me?" "Do you know how many people you've hurt?" James replied, his voice hoarse but steady. "The families destroyed by your schemes. The lawmen killed protecting your shipments." Elliot backhanded him casually. "Spare me the righteousness. Monroe, this territory runs on money and power, not your antiquated notions of justice." Clara had seen enough. She counted 8 men in the chamber, plus Elliot. The odds weren't good, but they had surprise and determination on their side. "When I give the signal," she whispered to Theodore, "you go left. Take out the man by the entrance. I'll handle Elliot." "What about the others?" Clara smiled grimly. "That's what the distraction is for." She stepped into the chamber, gun raised. "Elliot Roosevelt, you're under arrest." The room erupted into chaos. Elliot dove for cover as his men scrambled for weapons. Clara's first shot took the nearest guard in the shoulder, spinning him away from James. Theodore, true to his word, tackled the entrance guard, the 2 men rolling in a desperate struggle. Then the cavalry arrived literally. Franklin and Doc had apparently recruited help from the nearest town, and a dozen deputized citizens flooded into the mine from multiple entrances. The enclosed space became a battlefield, gunfire echoing deafeningly off stone walls. Clara fought her way toward James, dropping men with precise shots, her training serving her well. She reached his chair just as Elliot emerged from cover, gun aimed at James's head. "Drop it!" he screamed. "Everyone drop your weapons or Monroe dies." The fighting slowed, then stopped. Elliot had his gun pressed to James's temple, his finger tight on the trigger. "Let him go, Elliot," Clara said calmly. though her heart raced. "It's over. Look around. Your men are down or surrendered. There's nowhere to run." "There's always somewhere to run with enough money," Elliot snarled. "And I'm taking Monroe as insurance. Back away. All of you." "Elliot, no." Theodore stepped forward, hands raised. "Brother, please. This isn't you. This isn't who we were supposed to be." "Shut up." Elliot's attention shifted to his brother for just an instant. It was enough. Clara's shot was perfect, striking Elliot's gun hand. He screamed, the weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Before he could recover, James surged up, chair and all, knocking Elliot backward. The chair shattered against the stone floor, freeing James to pin Elliot down. "It's over," James said quietly, meeting Clara's eyes across the chaos. "Thank God you came." "Always," she said simply, cutting his bonds. "Though we're going to have a long talk about leaving secret letters and going off alone." He pulled her into his arms, heedless of the audience. "I'm sorry. I thought—" "You thought wrong," she interrupted, then kissed him soundly. "We're partners, remember, for better or worse, in sickness and health, in gunfights and mineshaft rescues." The aftermath was swift. Elliot Roosevelt was arrested, his criminal empire unraveling as conspirators rushed to make deals. Theodore, in exchange for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence, 5 years, to be served helping build the very communities his brother had exploited. As they rode back to Silver Creek, James leaning against Clara despite his protests that he was fine, she finally allowed herself to process the fear she'd held at bay. "I thought I'd lost you," she admitted quietly. "When I read that letter—" "I know. I'm sorry." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I thought I was protecting you." "We protect each other," Clara corrected. "That's what we do. That's who we are." They returned to Silver Creek as heroes once again, though both were tired of the role. All Clara wanted was their quiet life back, morning coffee together, evening walks, Saturday dances at the Gilded Rose. But first, there was healing to be done. Doc Holliday tended James's injuries, tisking over the damage. "You're lucky, Sheriff. Few more days and infection might have set in." "I had motivation to survive," James said, his eyes on Clara. Later, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Clara finally asked the question that had haunted her since reading James's letter. "Were you really ready to die to leave me behind?" James was quiet for a long moment. I thought if I died removing the last threat to our happiness, it would be worth it, that you'd be safe, even if I wasn't there." "James Monroe," Clara said firmly, "I need you to understand something. My safety means nothing without you. My happiness is impossible without you. We're not just married, we're woven together now. You can't make decisions for just yourself anymore." "I know," he said softly. "I understand that now. Sitting in that mine, thinking I'd never see you again. Clara, it nearly broke me. Not the pain or the fear of death, but the thought of leaving you." "Then don't," she said simply. "Don't leave me. Not for justice. Not for duty. Not for any reason. Stay with me. Fight beside me. Live with me. That's all I ask. For the rest of our lives," James promised, pulling her close. "No more secret missions. No more noble sacrifices. Just us, together, facing whatever comes." "Good," Clara said, settling against him. "Because I have plans for us, Sheriff Monroe. Plans that require you very much alive and by my side." As stars appeared in the Montana sky, they sat together, two souls who'd found their way through violence and loss to something precious and unbreakable. The dance hall girl and the sheriff had become simply Clara and James' partners, lovers, friends, and the strongest force for justice Silver Creek had ever known. Not because of their guns or their courage, though they had both in abundance, but because they'd learned the greatest truth of all, that love wasn't weakness to be hidden, but strength to be celebrated. And together, They were unstoppable. Summer came to Silver Creek with wildflowers and wedding bells. The town had flourished in the months since the Roosevelt scandal, attracting new settlers drawn by stories of a place where justice prevailed and second chances bloomed like prairie roses. Clara stood at the window of their home, watching preparations for the Founders' Day celebration, her hand resting on the gentle swell beneath her apron. "You should be resting," James said from the doorway, concern evident in his voice. "Doc Holliday said gentle activity is good for me," Clara reminded him, turning to smile at her protective husband. "Besides, I want to see the decorations. This is our first Founders' Day as a truly free town." James crossed to her, his arms encircling her from behind, hands joining hers over their growing child. "Free," he repeated softly. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real. No more looking over our shoulders, no more threats in the shadows. Just life." Clara agreed, leaning back against him. Beautiful, ordinary, precious life. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet moment. Franklin entered, grinning broadly. "Sorry to intrude, but there's someone here to see you both. Says it's important." They found their visitor in James's office, a well-dressed woman in her 50s, traveling clothes dusty from the road. She rose as they entered, and Clara gasped in recognition. Mrs. Whitman. Clara's former employer from Ohio stood before her, looking older but kind as ever. "What are you doing in Montana?" "Looking for you, my dear." "Mrs. Whitman said warmly. "When I heard about your father's passing last year, I tried to find you. It took some doing, but stories of a brave sheriff's wife in Silver Creek eventually reached even Ohio." Clara's throat tightened. She'd received word of her father's death months ago, but distance and circumstances had prevented her from attending the funeral. "He's really gone then?" "I'm afraid so, but Clara, he left something for you." Mrs. Whitman produced a leather portfolio. "Your father never lost faith that you'd make something of yourself. He saved every newspaper clipping about your adventures out here, every mention of the sheriff's wife who faced down outlaws and changed a town." With trembling fingers, Clara opened the portfolio. Inside were indeed newspaper clippings, but also letters, dozens of them, all addressed to her but never sent. "He was too proud to reach out," Mrs. Whitman explained gently. "But he wrote to you constantly. And there's this." She handed Clara a small wooden box. Inside lay her mother's wedding ring and a deed. Clara's eyes widened as she read it. "The store." "He bought it back, piece by piece, working odd jobs after losing everything. It's yours now. Clara, your inheritance." Mrs. Whitman smiled. "Though I suspect your life here is fuller than anything Ohio could offer." Clara looked at James, then around the office where they'd faced so many challenges together. Through the window, she could see the gilded rose, the church where they'd married, the streets where they'd fought for their future. "Thank you," she told Mrs. Whitman, closing the box gently. "But you're right. My life is here now. Perhaps we could sell the store. Use the money to build that school James has been dreaming about." James squeezed her hand. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Clara said firmly. "The past shaped us, but it doesn't define us. Our future is here, in Silver Creek." That evening, the Founders' Day celebration filled the streets with music and laughter. Clara and James walked among their neighbors, accepting congratulations on both the coming baby and the announcement of the new school. Martha had outdone herself organizing the festivities, including a special surprise. "Ladies and gentlemen," Martha called from the makeshift stage, "in honor of our sheriff and his wife, the Gilded Rose presents a special performance." The crowd parted as musicians struck up a familiar waltz. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she recognized it their song, the one that had started everything. "May I have this dance?" James asked formally. bowing slightly. "Always," Clara replied, taking his hand. They moved together in the street, no longer the grieving widower and desperate dance hall girl who'd first circled this floor. Now they were Sheriff and Mrs. Monroe, pillars of the community, soon to be parents, living proof that love could transform even the hardest hearts. As they danced, other couples joined them, Franklin and his wife, Doc Holliday with Mrs., Wellington causing quite a stir, even Theodore Roosevelt, on brief furlough from his work crew, dancing with Martha. The whole town moved to the music, united in celebration of how far they'd all come. "Look at what we built," Clara murmured to James as they turned. "Not just a life for us, but a community where anyone can find redemption." "We didn't build it alone," James reminded her. "Everyone here chose to be better, to reach for something more. We just showed them it was possible." The music swelled, and James spun Clara carefully, mindful of her condition. When he drew her back, she was laughing, radiant with joy. "Do you remember?" she asked. "That first night, how terrified I was to tell you it was my first dance. And I promised to be your last." James completed, "Best promise I ever made." "Even better than 'till death do us part." "Same promise, different words," he said simply. As the waltz ended, the crowd applauded. But the celebration was interrupted by the arrival of a lone rider. Dusty and exhausted, Clara recognized him, John McGraw's prison guard. "Sheriff," the man panted. "Letter from John McGraw. Said it was urgent you get it today." James took the letter warily, but his expression softened as he read. Without a word, he handed it to Clara. "Dear Sheriff and Mrs. Monroe, today marks 5 years since my brothers died. In the past, this anniversary meant planning revenge. This year, it means something different. I've been accepted into the prison education program. I'm learning to read properly, to write more than threats. The warden says if I continue on this path, I might earn early release for good behavior. I wanted you to know on this day particularly, I forgive you for my brothers' deaths. They chose their path, as did I. But you, Mrs. Monroe, you showed me there was another choice, a harder one, but better. I'm not the same man who tried to kill you. I hope when my time is served, to prove that people can change, you taught me that. With respect and gratitude, John McGraw." Clara wiped away tears as she finished reading. "He's going to make it," she said softly. "He's really going to make it?" "Thanks to you," James said. "Your compassion saved him." "Our compassion," Clara corrected. "Everything good in my life, I've done with you." As night fell over Silver Creek, Chinese lanterns were lit, casting warm light over the continuing celebration. Children ran through the streets playing, their laughter a symphony of hope. Couples danced to fiddle music, and old-timers shared stories of the bad old days when outlaws ruled and justice was just a dream. Clara found herself back at the Gilded Rose as the evening wound down, standing in the doorway of the place that had brought her everything she'd never dared hope for. "Regrets?" James asked, joining her. "Never," she said firmly. "Every step led me to you, the girl who walked in here 2 years ago, desperate and afraid she had no idea what was waiting for her." "A sheriff who danced like a bear," James teased. "A man who saw past what I was to who I could be," Clara corrected. "A love worth fighting for, a life worth living. And now," Clara touched her belly where their child grew. "Now we write the next chapter. We raise our children in a town where justice means compassion, where strength means standing together, where love conquers fear." "Children," James raised an eyebrow. "Plural." "Oh yes," Clara said with a smile. "I have plans, Sheriff Monroe, big plans." As they walked home through streets still humming with celebration, Clara thought about all the trails that had led to this moment, her father's failure that had seemed like an ending but was really a beginning. The desperate choice to become a dance hall girl that had brought her to James. The violence they'd faced that had only made their love stronger. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For asking me to dance, for keeping your promise, for showing me that I was worth more than survival." She stopped, turning to face him fully. "For choosing to live again, with me." James cupped her face gently, his gray eyes soft with love. "Thank you for being brave enough to say yes, for saving me in every way a person can be saved, for being my last dance, my only dance, forever." They kissed there in the street where they'd once faced down outlaws, where their love had been tested by bullets and prejudice. Around them, Silver Creek settled into peaceful slumber, safe under the watch of a sheriff and his wife who'd proven that love and justice weren't opposing forces, but partners in the dance of life. 9 months later, when Clara held their daughter for the first time, little Catherine Hope Monroe, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate whisper on a dance floor to this moment of perfect joy, every step had been worth it. "She's beautiful," James whispered, touching their daughter's tiny hand with infinite gentleness. "She's our future," Clara replied, "born into a world we helped make better." Outside their window, Silver Creek thrived. The new school was nearly complete, funded by the sale of Clara's inherited store. Former outlaws worked alongside lawmen to build something lasting, and in the Gilded Rose, now a respectable dance hall and social club, Martha trained new girls in the art of conversation and dignity, creating opportunities for women seeking second chances. "Tell me," James said softly as their daughter slept, "when you stepped off that stagecoach 2 years ago, did you imagine any of this?" "No," Clara admitted. "I imagined survival, maybe respectability if I was lucky. I never imagined love like this, purpose like this, joy like this." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "But you know what? I'm glad I was brave enough to find out what was possible." "My brave Clara," James murmured. "My love, my partner, my last dance, forever and always." Clara confirmed, settling against him as their daughter dreamed whatever dreams babies dream. In the distance, music drifted from the Gilded Rose, another dance, another chance for magic to strike, and in the sheriff's house, a family that had begun with a whispered confession and a bold promise settled into their happily ever after. Proof that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the courage to take that first, uncertain step onto the dance floor of life. The dance hall girl had found her home. The grieving sheriff had found his heart. And together, they'd found a love story for the ages wild as the Montana mountains, gentle as a lullaby, and true as the promise between them. "You're my first dance, and I'll be your last." Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and second chances in the Wild West. I hope Clara and James's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. Where are you listening to this story from? Please leave a comment below, and let's share our thoughts about their incredible adventure together. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And if you really want to help more people discover these frontier love stories, please hit the hype button. It makes such a difference in helping our stories reach fellow lovers of Western romance. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love and second chances.